Hello and welcome to this fourth week of this online course on environmental sociology. In the coming 2 to 3 weeks, we will discuss one of the important topic of environmental sociology, that is the theoretical debates in the field. When we see the theoretical debates in environmental sociology, we realize that over the years, there has been a fundamental shift in the theoretical arguments in the field. While in the initial years in 1980s, when environmental sociology emerged as an independent field of inquiry, the major theoretical debate or the major theoretical question was to explain the causes of environmental degradation. However, over the years, there has been a fundamental shift from explaining the causes of environmental degradation to that of explaining environmental reforms. So, in that context, in today's class, we will discuss about introduction to theoretical approaches to environmental sociology. The basic objective of today's class is to examine different theoretical approaches in environmental sociology and to understand the gradual shift or the gradual transformation of the primary questions that are addressed by these theoretical debates. After successfully completing this module, the students will be able to understand the various theoretical approaches to the study of environmental sociology and to identify the different traditions of theories and understand their differences. Students will also be able to distinguish between various waves of theories which came in the past few decades. With regard to the major themes of today's class, I have divided this class into 3 major themes. So, we will discuss about theoretical explanations of environmental degradation. Secondly, we will discuss about theoretical debates or theoretical explanations of environmental reforms, and finally, we will discuss that what are the reasons for this fundamental shift in the theoretical debate from that of environmental degradation or from that explanation of environmental degradation to that of explanation of environmental reforms. Okay, so let us start with the first theme of today's class, that is theoretical explanation of environmental degradation. When we see theoretical explanations in environmental degradation, we find that there are 2 broad approaches in environmental sociology which discuss the theoretical explanations of environmental degradation. They are the ecological explanation and the political economic explanation. With regard to ecological explanation, we will basically discuss Robert Park's urban ecology or human ecology, and we will also discuss Dunlop and Catton's competing functions of environment. And with regard to political economic approach or political economic explanation of environmental degradation, we will discuss Alan Scanberg's treadmill of production theory. Okay, so let us begin with the ecological explanation of environmental degradation. Perhaps Robert Park's urban ecology or human ecology, which came up in 1920s from the Chicago School of Sociology, that is one of the initial attempts to understand urban expansion, to understand the expansion of cities from an ecological perspective. Robert Park's urban ecology or Robert Park's human ecology was significantly influenced by Darwin, and Robert Park explained urban ecology as a web of life. He explained city as a web of life where there is an active principle of struggle for existence. Robert Park explained the expansion of city taking into account the nature-society interaction, where he explained that there is a constant struggle for existence in the cities, there is a constant struggle for resources in the cities, and humans are defined or humans are explained as one element in the larger web of life of the urban ecology. However, in Robert Park's urban ecology, the position of humans in this larger ecological web or this larger web of life was slightly different. According to Robert Park, even though human beings were a part of the larger ecological system, or even though human beings are a part of the web of life, but they are not so much immediately dependent on nature, where Robert Park makes a distinction between industrial society and the pre-industrial society, and he is of the opinion that as society moves on to the industrial society, dependence upon nature reduces. And secondly, in industrial society, technology has allowed humans to remake their environment and rather than to be constrained by it. In other words, human beings in this web of nature occupy a special position, where human beings, because of the power of technology, because of the power of technological knowledge, they are in a position where they can remake their environment, where they can remake their nature. Thirdly, the structure of human society, or if you see how human society is structured, the structure of human society is not just a product of biologically determined factors. So, what he means to say is that even though human beings constitute one element in the web of life, but the structural organization of the society is more than just the biological product or biological factors of the ecological system. They are more governed by the cultural factors. So, this vision of Robert Park, or this kind of explanation of Robert Park, when we compare that, or when we juxtapose that with that of Dunlap and Catton's new ecological framework or new ecological paradigm, which we just discussed in the previous week, we may summarize that Robert Park's model emphasizes humans' exceptional characteristics rather than their communality with nature or communality with others in the nature. And this explanation of Robert Park also gives priority to social and cultural factors rather than biological or environmental determinants. And this kind of explanation again downplays the constraints imposed by nature rather it celebrates human capacity to master it. So, therefore, Robert Park, even though he has explained human societies or expansion of cities taking into account humans' position in the larger ecosystem, but in Robert Park's urban ecology, human beings constitute a distinct category who has control over the nature, and it is because of this control over nature, human beings has the ability to remake the nature. Human beings have the ability to redesign the nature which will be conducive, which will suit to their requirements. So, the point to understand here is that even though Robert Park mentions about human beings' role in the larger ecosystem, but Robert Park's human ecology suffers from the problem that it emphasizes or overemphasizes the role of human beings. It considers humans as a distinct reality, it considers humans as a distinct category who has ability to control over the nature because of their dominance of technological power. Then we come to O.D. Duncan's POET model. In fact, we have already discussed this model. O.D. Duncan's POET model also provides an ecological explanation of environmental degradation. Duncan depicted these four elements of the ecological complex as population, organization, environment and technology. Duncan was of the opinion that in the ecological complex, these four elements are interrelated with each other. So, each element is interrelated to the other, and a change in one factor can lead to change in the other factor. So, this model or the POET model by O.D. Duncan, it provided an insight into the complex nature of ecological disruption. That ecological disruption takes place or environmental degradation takes place when any element of this ecosystem or any element of this ecological complex changes. For example, an increase in the population can create a pressure on technological change, and technological change would lead to urbanization, and urbanization would lead to pollution or ecological degradation. So, if you can see this figure, it becomes clear that O.D. Duncan's POET model is a model where different elements of the ecosystem are always in constant relationship with each other. One is related to the other, and a change in population had an impact on technology, and a change in technology has an impact on social organization, and as organization changes, that has an impact on environment. Like when technological innovation takes place, then societies or societal organization changes from that of rural society to that of urban society, and when society gets urbanized, when society gets industrialized, that has a negative impact on environment. So, therefore, O.D. Duncan's ecological complex model helps us to understand explanations of ecological degradation. Similarly, Rayleigh Dunlap and William Catton also provide an ecological explanation to understand environmental degradation, which they titled or which they term as competing functions of environment. So, Dunlap and Catton provide these competing functions of environment, where they say that environment basically fulfills three functions. It fulfills the function of supply depot, it fulfills the function of living space, and it also fulfills the function of waste repository. But what is interesting to observe in this model of competing functions of environment is that when these competing functions are in a balance with each other, perhaps that does not produce environmental degradation. Whereas, when we cross the carrying capacity, because these three functions are always in competition with each other, when we increase our use of one function of environment, like when we increase our use of living space, then that also means that we produce more waste, and that results in a competition or a conflict between functions of environment as a waste repository and function of environment as a living space. So, it is these competing functions of different functions of environment, it is this competition between different functions of environment, and when it crosses the carrying capacity of the earth, then it results in environmental degradation. So, when we see these two ecological perspectives of environmental degradation, we realize that there are certain advantages of Dunlap and Catton's model than that of Robert Park's model. So, Dunlap and Catton's competing functions of environment extends human ecology beyond the living space, while Robert Park's human ecology, or while Robert Park's urban ecology talks about the living space, talks about the city, expansion of city, William and Catton's model of competing functions of environment talks about different functions of environment. That environment does not only provide us a living space, it also provides space to deposit our waste, it also provides our resources to carry out a production process. So, in that sense, Dunlap and Catton's competing functions of environment provides an advanced model to understand the basic relationship between human society and the nature, and it also provides an advanced model to understand environmental degradation. Secondly, Dunlap and Catton's model of competing functions of environment also incorporates a time dimension. Competing functions of environment model tells us that if you want to understand environmental degradation, we need to see it over a period of time. That maybe earlier, when our demand for nature for raw materials, when our use of nature for depositing waste, when it was within the carrying capacity, perhaps there was no environmental degradation. But as with the passage of time, as society changes and as these competing functions increases, or as our demand from these functions of environment increases, we find that there is an ecological degradation or environmental degradation. But at the same time, Dunlap and Catton's model of competing functions of environment it is also subject to several criticisms, it also suffers from several problems. It says nothing about the social action, or it says nothing about the social role that is involved to improve the conditions of environment. Having discussed the ecological explanation of ecological degradation, let us now discuss the political economic explanation of environmental degradation. So, we will define here, or we will discuss here Alan Skenberg's book, The Environment from Surplus to Scarcity, which was published in 1980. And again, Alan Skenberg draws heavily from neo-Marxism and neo-Weberian political sociology to portray a relationship between capitalism, state and environmental degradation. So, Skenberg provided his treadmill of production theory, which basically explains the relationship between capitalism, state and environmental degradation. So, according to Skenberg, that if you want to understand environmental degradation, maybe we need to understand the process of capitalism. So, he gives an analysis of capitalism, or he describes capitalism, and he says that capitalism has an inherent tendency to produce environmental degradation. There is an inherent tendency of certain conflicts within capitalism. And Skenberg defines or labels modern industrial societies as a treadmill. So, modern industrial societies are a treadmill, and the political economy of environmental problems are organized within this treadmill. So, what Alan Skenberg describes is that during the process of capitalism, there is a societal environmental dialectic. Drawing from the Marxian analysis of dialectic, drawing from Marxian analysis of the inherent contradictions within capitalism, Skenberg also says that there is certain inherent contradictions within capitalism, and that inherent contradiction is a contradiction between society and environment, or societal and environmental dialectic. What Skenberg says is that capitalist ecosystem or capitalist economic system has an inherent need to yield profit. So, how capitalism can generate profit? Only when capitalism can make consumer demands alive, and therefore, what Skenberg says that to make consumer demand alive, or to create new demand for consumers, capitalist society relies to a great extent on advertisement, and advertisements creates a demand for products, and it creates new demand for products, and as demand for products increases, capitalism will produce more, and in this profit maximization, or in this process of production of new products, this expands the ecological system to a point where it exceeds the physical limit to growth, or it exceeds the carrying capacity. What basically Skenberg's treadmill of production theory argues is that capitalism has an inherent tendency to generate profit, and it is the profit maximization which will lead capitalism, or which will result in production of more and more goods in capitalism, more and more goods in the capitalist system. And while producing more and goods in the capitalist system, capitalism will expand the ecosystem to a point beyond which further growth or further production becomes a challenging task, or becomes a difficult task. And in other words, what Skenberg argues, that capitalism has an inherent tendency to cross the carrying capacity of the earth. what will be the role of the state in such a kind of situation, what will be the response of state in such a kind of situation. Steinberg says that in such a kind of situation, the state will be responding by making way or by facilitating more and more capital intensive technologies, and that will encourage further expansion of environmental degradation. What Steinberg argues is that instead of limiting ecological degradation, capitalism will ultimately result in expanding ecological degradation. So, Steinberg argues that capitalism has an inherent tendency to generate a dialectic tension between the society and the environment, which otherwise describes as societal environmental dialectics. A dialectic tension arises because of the conflict between the treadmill of production and demand for environmental protection. Or in the process of capitalist production, environmental degradation will increase. At the same time, in the capitalist states, there will also be a demand from the people to deal with this degradation of nature. So, that will lead or that will result in a dialectic tension between capitalist state or capitalist society and that of environmental protection or concerns for environment. While on the one hand, a capitalist state and capitalist society will continue its degradation of nature, on the other hand, in the same capitalist society, there will be rising concerns among people, there will be rising debates among people to deal with these environmental degradation, and that will lead to a tension between the society and the capitalist state. That as environmental protection emerges as a significant agenda in the public debates, or as more and more awareness increases about environmental protection, the state must increasingly balance its role between two aspects. That is, one, facilitator of capitalist accumulation and economic growth, and second, its role as an environmental regulator or environmental champion. In this kind of capitalist society, the state has to do a dual role, or the state has to fulfill a dual role. On the one hand, there is a demand within the capitalist society to protect the nature. There is social movement within a capitalist society to protect the nature, because the inherent benefits of nature has been realized and protection of nature has come to the public agenda. So, therefore, there is a demand within the capitalist state to protect the nature. On the other hand, there is a demand from the capitalist economy to produce more, and production or more production or increasing the production process results in more and more environmental degradation. So, the state now is in a dilemma. So, therefore, what Steinberg says, that the state is in a dialectic condition. The state is in a dilemmatic condition, and it has to make a balance between its role as environmental regulator, as environmental champion or environmental protector. On the other hand, state should also think about its role as a facilitator of economic growth. So, the state has to make its balance, or the state has to make a balance between these two conflicting roles. It has to play the role of an environmental champion. At the same time, it also has to play its role as a facilitator of as a facilitator of growing capitalism. But when you look the situation a little more carefully, how the state will behave in such a kind of dialectic situation? State has to engage in a limited degree of environmental intervention in order to stop natural resources from being exploited. So, therefore, the state has to play a dual role. State has to make a balance between its dual role, where it has to stop natural resources from being exploited. At the same time, it will also should take care of economic growth. So, therefore, the state will respond in a way where it can balance these conflicting roles, and that will help, or that will result in enhancing state's legitimacy over the people, and that will help the state to maintain its hegemonic power. So, therefore, state cannot openly say that it supports environmental protection and therefore neglects economic aspects of economic growth. At the same time, state also cannot openly say that it supports or facilitates capitalism and therefore it does not care for the nature. The state or a capitalist state in this treadmill of production has to take a balanced role, where it can come out with limited environmental interventions, which will be sufficient to give it a more hegemonic power over the people.